The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the kind of place where lives quietly fall apart. I stood at the defense table, palms sweating, staring at the heavy oak doors where the judge would enter any second. My lawyer whispered something about staying calm, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Outside the courthouse windows, rain streaked the glass like the world itself was dissolving. Across the aisle sat Graham Whitlock, the wealthy developer suing me. His tailored suit looked like it cost more than my entire garage. He leaned back in his chair, smiling as if this trial were already over. And honestly, it probably was. I was a mechanic named Elias Carter, barely keeping my garage alive. He was a millionaire with lawyers, influence, and a reputation for crushing people who stood in his way. The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." The courtroom stood. The judge walked in. At first, I didn't even look up. But then something about his voice, something painfully familiar. And when I finally raised my eyes, my entire body froze. Because the man sitting behind that bench was the same homeless stranger who once slept in my garage. 3 years earlier, my life was simpler, just quieter. My garage sat at the far end of Maple Street, where the town faded into rusted warehouses and cracked sidewalks. The smell of motor oil lived permanently in the air, mixed with the distant scent of pine trees from the hills. It wasn't much. 2 repair bays. A dented coffee machine. A radio that only worked when it wanted to. But it was mine. My father built the place decades earlier with his own hands, and after he passed, keeping the garage alive felt like keeping a piece of him breathing. Business was slow. Big chain auto shops had opened closer to the highway, stealing most customers. Some weeks I barely made enough to cover electricity. Still, every morning I rolled open the garage door and got to work. Because quitting wasn't an option. One cold autumn evening after closing up, I walked toward the dumpster behind the garage to toss out scrap metal. That's when I saw him. A man sitting on the curb. Thin coat. Graying beard. Hands trembling in the cold. He looked up slowly, almost cautiously. Like he expected me to chase him away. Instead, I asked the simplest question. "Have you eaten today?" And that moment changed everything. He introduced himself as Silas Reed. His voice was calm, almost careful, like someone who measured every word before speaking. I handed him a container of leftover stew I'd brought for dinner. He thanked me like it was a 5-star meal. Up close, something about him didn't match the usual image of a homeless drifter. His posture was straight. His eyes were sharp, observant, the kind of eyes that studied everything. After he finished eating, he tried to leave immediately. Didn't ask for money. Didn't ask for anything. But the wind that night cut through the alley like broken glass. So I said something without thinking. "If you want, you can sleep inside the garage tonight." He hesitated. A long silence passed. Then he asked quietly, almost suspiciously, "Why?" I shrugged. "Because it's cold." That night he slept on an old couch in the back office. I figured it would be a one-time thing. But the next morning when I arrived, the floor was swept. The tools were organized. And Silas was gone. Silas returned the next evening. Then the next. Eventually, sleeping in the garage became a quiet routine. He never asked for more than a corner of the couch and a cup of coffee. But he always helped. Sweeping floors. Sorting bolts. Organizing tools better than I ever had. Customers even began noticing. One farmer joked, "You finally hired someone who knows how to clean." Silas would only smile. Sometimes, during slow afternoons, he'd sit near the garage door watching the road. Like he was studying the world. We talked occasionally. Not about his past, he always avoided that. But about strange things. Justice. Choices. Human nature. One afternoon he said something that stuck with me. "Kindness is the rarest currency in the world." I laughed it off at the time. But now, looking back, it felt like he was saying it for a reason. Still, I never asked too many questions. Until the day someone else did. And suddenly the whole town started paying attention. His name was Ronan Pike. Owner of the hardware store across the street and unofficial mayor of everyone's business. Ronan noticed everything. And one morning he walked into my garage, arms crossed, staring straight at Silas. "Who's the new guy?" Silas nodded politely. "Just passing through." Ronan didn't buy it. Later he pulled me aside. "You letting strangers live here now?" "He's not hurting anyone," I said. Ronan shook his head. "People don't end up homeless for no reason." His words bothered me more than I expected. That night I looked at Silas differently. Tried to imagine what kind of life led someone to the streets. But when I finally asked him about his past, he simply said, "Sometimes people disappear on purpose." Then he changed the subject. And somehow, that answer only made me trust him more. But someone else in town had already noticed the garage. Someone powerful. Someone who would soon change my life completely. The first time Graham Whitlock walked into my garage, it felt like someone had brought a luxury hotel into a scrapyard. Perfect suit. Polished shoes. Expensive watch. He looked around like the place smelled bad. "I believe you're the owner," he said. I wiped grease from my hands. "That depends who's asking." He smiled thinly. "I'm buying land in this area." Then he pointed out the window. "At my garage. I'd like to purchase this property." I laughed. "Not for sale." His smile faded. "I'm offering 3 times market value." Still no. This garage was my father's legacy. Whitlock studied me for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Everyone has a price." He walked out. Silas had been standing quietly by the tool rack. When Whitlock left, he asked softly, "Are you certain refusing him was wise?" I shrugged again. "What's the worst that could happen?" Silas didn't answer, but his expression said something I didn't understand yet. Something close to concern. Business slowed even more after that. Not suddenly. Gradually. Customers canceled repairs. Delivery trucks stopped coming. One supplier claimed my account had been suspended. Something felt wrong. One evening, Silas sat across from me at the small office table. "You're being pressured," he said calmly. I frowned. "For what?" "For refusing Whitlock." I scoffed. "You think he's behind this?" Silas didn't answer right away. Instead he asked, "Have you ever seen how powerful people remove obstacles?" The way he said it made the room feel colder. "You're overthinking it," I said. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. That night before leaving, Silas paused at the garage door. "If things become difficult, remember something." "What?" "Truth has patience." Then he disappeared into the dark street. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his strange sayings. I had no idea it was a warning, because the real trouble hadn't even started yet. It happened on a Tuesday night. A storm rolled across town, thunder shaking the windows. I closed the garage early. Silas was already asleep on the couch when I left. The next morning, police were waiting outside. 2 patrol cars. Yellow tape. My stomach dropped. An officer approached. "Are you Elias Carter?" "Yes." "We need to ask you about an incident last night." He pointed toward the industrial lot down the road. Construction equipment had been destroyed. Thousands of dollars in damage. And according to the security guard, someone matching my description had been seen near the site. I laughed nervously. "That's impossible." But the officer's face didn't change. Then he asked a question that made my heart stop. "Where were you between midnight and 2 a.m.? I turned toward the garage. Toward the office couch. Where Silas should have been sleeping. But when I opened the door, the couch was empty. And Silas was gone. Silas didn't come back that night. Or the next. His blanket was folded neatly. The couch spotless. Like he had erased himself. At first I thought maybe the police scared him away. But something about the way he left felt deliberate. 3 days later, the police returned. This time with more questions. The construction site belonged to Whitlock's company. And suddenly I was their prime suspect. "You refused to sell him your land," the officer said. "Then his equipment gets sabotaged." The implication hung in the air. I denied everything. But doubt had already started spreading through town. Even Ronan avoided eye contact. Without Silas around, the garage felt strangely empty, quieter than ever. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger had started moving behind the scenes. something I didn't understand yet. But what I didn't know was that Silas hadn't simply disappeared. He had been watching everything. The official letter arrived 2 weeks later. Whitlock wasn't just accusing me of sabotage. He was suing me for damages. Over $200,000. More money than I'd see in a lifetime. My lawyer, a tired man named Caleb Moss, explained it bluntly. If this goes to court and you lose, the garage is gone. Whitlock had witnesses. Security testimony. Photos placing someone near the site. Everything looked bad. Did you do it? Caleb asked carefully. No. He studied my face. Then we fight. But even he sounded uncertain. That night I sat alone in the garage office, looking at the empty couch where Silas once slept. I kept remembering his words. Truth has patience. I hoped he was right, because right now, the truth felt very far away. And Whitlock looked like he had already won. 3 months passed before the trial date. Business nearly collapsed. Debt piled up. Then one evening something strange happened. A plain envelope appeared under the garage door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only one sentence written in neat handwriting. Attend the hearing. Do not lose hope. No signature. But I recognized the writing instantly. Silas. My chest tightened. He was alive. Somewhere. Watching. But why disappear? Why not come back? The note didn't answer anything. It raised even more questions. And the biggest one of all was still coming. Because the trial day was approaching. And someone very unexpected would be waiting in that courtroom. The closer the trial got, the colder the town became. People whispered when I walked past. Some believed Whitlock's story. Others just didn't want trouble. Ronan finally confronted me one evening. You need to settle, he said. With money I don't have? With pride you can't afford. Maybe he was right. But something in me refused to give up. Because deep down, I knew I was innocent. And strangely enough, Silas seemed to know it too. That night before leaving the garage, I looked at the empty couch again. For the first time, I realized something strange. Silas had never asked for help. Never complained. Never explained who he really was. Almost like he had been studying something. Or someone. For what? That answer was waiting in the courthouse. And it was about to change everything. The morning of the trial arrived gray and heavy. My lawyer adjusted his tie nervously. Whitlock sat confidently across the aisle. Spectators filled the benches. Word had spread. Small town trials were rare entertainment. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise. The courtroom stood. The judge entered. I stared down at the table, too nervous to look up. Then the judge spoke. Be seated. The voice hit me like lightning. Familiar. Impossible. So I raised my head, and the world stopped. Because sitting behind the judge's bench, wearing black robes and a calm, unreadable expression, was the same man who once slept on my garage couch. Silas Reed. Only now, everyone in the room addressed him as, Your Honor. My brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The man sitting behind the bench, calm, composed, dressed in black judicial robes, was the same man who once drank cheap coffee in my garage and slept on a worn-out couch. Silas Reed. Only now the bailiff addressed him differently. Honorable Judge Adrian Rowe presiding. Adrian Rowe. The name rippled across the courtroom like a quiet wave. Whitlock's lawyers straightened their files. My own lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, Rowe's one of the most respected judges in the state. I barely heard him. Judge Rowe's eyes briefly moved across the courtroom. For 1 second, they landed on me. There was no smile. No recognition. Nothing. Just the same calm, unreadable expression judges wear when deciding strangers' fates. Had I imagined everything? Was Silas just someone who happened to look like him? The trial began. Whitlock's attorney stood and delivered a confident opening statement, painting me as a desperate mechanic who vandalized construction equipment after refusing to sell his land. The story sounded convincing. Too convincing. Then my lawyer rose to respond. But before he spoke, Judge Rowe leaned slightly forward and said something that made the entire room shift. Before we proceed, he said calmly, I want every piece of evidence in this case reviewed with exceptional care. It sounded routine, but when his eyes briefly met mine again, I sensed something else entirely. Something quiet. Something deliberate. Almost like the game had just begun. Courtrooms move slower than people expect. Witnesses speak. Lawyers argue. Evidence gets passed around like puzzle pieces. But something strange happened during the first day of testimony. Judge Rowe watched everything. Not casually. Intensely. Every time Whitlock's lawyer spoke, the judge leaned slightly forward. Every time evidence appeared, his gaze sharpened. When the security guard testified about seeing someone near the construction site, Rowe asked unusual follow-up questions. Not hostile. Just precise. What time exactly? How far away were you? What lighting conditions were present? The guard stumbled on some answers. Whitlock's lawyer quickly redirected the conversation. During recess, my lawyer looked confused. Rowe's asking questions judges usually leave to attorneys. Is that bad? I asked. Not necessarily, but it means he's interested. Interested in what? The case ended for the day. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Rowe gathered his files slowly. For a moment I thought he might look at me again. But he didn't. He simply stood and walked through the private door behind the bench. Yet something about his behavior left a strange feeling in my chest. Like pieces of a story were moving quietly behind the scenes. Pieces nobody else could see yet. Day 2 of the trial began with surveillance footage. Whitlock's lawyer displayed grainy nighttime video from the construction site. A blurry figure appeared near the equipment. This is the defendant, the attorney said confidently. The courtroom murmured. From a distance, it did resemble me. Same height. Similar jacket. But something felt wrong. Judge Rowe leaned forward. Pause the video. The room fell silent. He asked the technician to zoom in. The image became pixelated but clearer. Rowe studied it for several seconds. Then he asked a question nobody expected. Can you confirm the timestamp accuracy? Whitlock's attorney stiffened slightly. It came from the security system, Your Honor. Yes, Rowe replied calmly. But who verified the time calibration? The technician hesitated. Whitlock's lawyer jumped in quickly. The system is professionally maintained. Rowe didn't argue, but he wrote something in his notes. My lawyer leaned toward me. That question matters. Why? If the timestamp is wrong, the whole timeline collapses. For the first time since the lawsuit began, a tiny spark of hope flickered inside me. But Whitlock didn't look worried. In fact, he was smiling, like he still had something bigger waiting. And unfortunately, he did. Whitlock's strategy changed on the third day. If he couldn't prove sabotage perfectly, he would destroy my credibility instead. His lawyer called town witnesses. One by one they described my financial struggles. Late payments. Declining business. Arguments about selling the property. Then Ronan Pike took the stand. My chest tightened. He glanced at me before speaking. I warned Elias he was making a mistake refusing Whitlock's offer, Ronan said. Did he seem angry? The lawyer asked. Frustrated, yes. The lawyer turned dramatically toward the jury. A man under financial pressure, refusing a generous offer, then construction equipment gets destroyed. The implication hung heavily. Even my lawyer looked uneasy. Judge Rowe remained silent. Expression unreadable. But just before dismissing the witness, he asked Ronan one last question. Did you ever see the defendant damage property? Ronan hesitated. No. Rowe nodded. Thank you. It seemed like a small moment, but something about it weakened the prosecution's narrative. Whitlock's lawyer clearly noticed. His confidence shifted slightly, and for the first time, Whitlock leaned forward in his chair, watching the judge carefully, almost like he was starting to worry about something. That evening my lawyer called me with surprising news. We received a court order, he said. What kind? Judge Rowe demanded additional records from Whitlock's company. My heart skipped. Why? He didn't say. The documents arrived the next morning. Construction contracts. Security logs. Maintenance reports. At first glance they seemed irrelevant, But during testimony, Rowe asked another unusual question. To confirm, he said calmly, who supervises security equipment maintenance? Whitlock's project manager answered, our internal operations team. Rowe nodded slowly. And how long have they managed these systems? The manager flipped through papers nervously. About 4 months. Rowe paused. And the sabotage occurred 3 months ago. Silence filled the room. The implication was subtle but powerful. If Whitlock's own team controlled the cameras, they could also control the footage. Whitlock's lawyer objected quickly. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. As the court adjourned, I felt something shifting. Like a quiet investigation was unfolding right in front of everyone. Only one question remained. Why was Judge Rowe digging this deeply? And the answer was much closer than I realized. On the 4th day of trial, something unexpected happened. Judge Rowe allowed a new witness. A former Whitlock employee named Trevor Haynes. Whitlock's face immediately tightened. Trevor looked nervous as he took the stand. My lawyer questioned him carefully. Did you work for Whitlock Development during the time of the incident? Yes. What was your job? Site security technician. The courtroom leaned forward. Trevor swallowed. I was told to adjust the camera timestamps. Whitlock's lawyer exploded in objection. But Judge Rowe raised a hand. Let him continue. Trevor's voice trembled. I didn't know why at first. Later I realized they needed the footage to match a timeline. A timeline accusing the defendant? My lawyer asked. Trevor nodded. Gasps filled the room. Whitlock's lawyer tried to discredit him. But the damage was done. Whitlock himself looked furious. As the witness stepped down, Judge Rowe studied Whitlock for a long moment. Then he quietly announced a recess. As people stood and murmured around the courtroom, I realized something huge had just cracked open. But the biggest truth still hadn't been revealed. The next witness brought the real shock. An independent mechanic who inspected the damaged equipment. He explained something simple but devastating. The damage wasn't random. What do you mean? My lawyer asked. It was deliberate, but carefully limited. Limited how? Enough to look serious, but not enough to destroy the machines permanently. The courtroom went silent. You're saying it was staged? My lawyer asked. Yes. Whitlock's attorney tried to object again. But Judge Rowe allowed the testimony. The mechanic continued. Someone wanted the equipment damaged just enough to justify a lawsuit. My lawyer slowly turned toward Whitlock. And if that lawsuit forced a property owner into bankruptcy, the land would become available. Every head in the courtroom turned. Whitlock's calm confidence finally cracked. Judge Rowe tapped his pen thoughtfully. Then he asked the final question. In your professional opinion, could the defendant have done this alone? The mechanic shook his head. No. That answer changed everything. Suddenly the case wasn't about my guilt. It was about Whitlock's scheme. But the courtroom still didn't understand the full story. Because one final piece was missing. And that piece was the judge himself. As testimony ended for the day, Judge Rowe called both legal teams forward. I watched nervously from my seat. He spoke quietly, but the courtroom microphones carried every word. This case has revealed serious inconsistencies. Whitlock's lawyer insisted the accusations were speculation. Rowe listened calmly. Then he said something unusual. I have spent many years observing human behavior. Certain patterns become obvious. Whitlock shifted uncomfortably. Rowe's gaze moved across the courtroom. Then briefly, for the first time since the trial began, his eyes softened slightly. Just for a moment. Recognition. Then it vanished. He announced court would resume the next morning for final arguments. As the courtroom emptied, my lawyer shook his head. I don't know what Rowe's doing, but he's dismantling Whitlock's case piece by piece. I nodded slowly. But inside my mind another question burned louder. Why had Silas, Judge Rowe, ever been living in my garage? That mystery still had no answer. But tomorrow, everything would finally come into the open. The final day of trial began with closing arguments. Whitlock's lawyer fought desperately to maintain the original accusation. But the evidence had shifted too far. Manipulated footage. altered timestamps, stage damage, witness testimony. When my lawyer finished presenting the defense, the courtroom felt completely different. Whitlock's confident smile was gone. Judge Rowe called for a brief recess before delivering his ruling. The silence inside the room felt electric. When he returned, everyone stood. He reviewed the evidence calmly. Then he delivered the words that changed everything. The accusations against the defendant are unsupported and deeply flawed. My chest tightened. But Rowe continued. Furthermore, testimony suggests the possibility of deliberate manipulation by the plaintiff. Whitlock's face went pale. The judge dismissed the case immediately. But he didn't stop there. He ordered a formal investigation into Whitlock's business practices. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Whitlock stood abruptly, furious. But the bailiff stepped closer. And just like that, the powerful developer who tried to destroy my life was suddenly the one under scrutiny. Yet the most unbelievable moment of all was still coming. After the courtroom emptied, the bailiff approached me. "Judge Rowe would like to speak with you privately." My heart pounded as I entered his chambers. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he smiled faintly. "Hello, Elias." The voice was unmistakable. "Silas, you knew the whole time?" I asked. "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything?" He leaned back thoughtfully. "Because judges cannot show personal bias. If the court knew we had met before, I would have been removed from the case." My mind raced. "But why were you living in my garage in the first place?" Rowe's expression softened. 3 years ago I stepped away from public life for a short time. "Why?" "To see the world without my title, without influence." He paused. "And to rediscover something I had lost." "What?" "Faith in ordinary people." He looked directly at me. "During those months, dozens of strangers ignored me." His voice grew quiet. "But one struggling mechanic offered a place to sleep." My throat tightened. That simple act reminded me what justice is supposed to protect. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because Rowe had one final revelation. And it was bigger than either of us expected. Rowe handed me a folder. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Financial records. Investigation reports. Evidence collected long before the trial began. "You were investigating Whitlock already?" I asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because complaints about his business practices had been quietly accumulating for years. Whitlock had built his empire by forcing small property owners into lawsuits, bankrupting them, then buying their land cheaply. My case was simply the latest attempt. When I realized you were the target," Rowe said calmly, "I ensured the truth would surface through proper legal channels." The investigation triggered by the trial had already begun expanding. Fraud charges, evidence tampering, corporate corruption. Whitlock's empire was collapsing. "Everything he tried to take from others," Rowe said quietly, "is about to be taken from him." For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting from my chest. Justice had finally caught up with him. But Rowe wasn't finished. Because the final lesson of the story wasn't about revenge. It was about something far more powerful. Weeks later the town felt different. Whitlock's developments shut down. Investigations spread across multiple companies. The man who once tried to crush me had lost everything. Meanwhile the garage slowly came back to life. Customers returned. Trust returned. One afternoon a young drifter appeared outside my garage. Cold, hungry, nervous. He reminded me of someone. I handed him a cup of coffee, then pointed toward the couch inside the office. "You can sleep there tonight if you want." His face lit up with disbelief. As he walked inside, I remembered something Judge Rowe told me before we parted. "Kindness moves quietly," he said, "but it travels farther than power ever can." That lesson stayed with me. Because the world often rewards money, influence, and force. But sometimes, the smallest act of compassion echoes through places we never expect. A garage. A courtroom. A life saved from ruin. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. You never know who someone truly is, or how far one moment of kindness might travel. A little act of kindness can mean a lot and can sometimes come with a reward. So if this story meant something to you, share your thoughts.